Welcome to Encounter, where we celebrate putting faith into action and community leaders who live out compassion, grace, and love. We're a program of the Broome County Council of Churches that addresses food insecurity through CHOW and the Greater Good Grocery, provides hospital and jail ministry, builds wheelchair ramps, and assists neighbors with transportation and shopping services through Faith in Action volunteers. We invite you to the conversation. Encounter your neighbors as we learn to walk together in love and kindness.
Good morning and welcome to Encounter. I'm your host today, Joe Sellepack, Executive Director at the Broome County Council of Churches. Many wouldn't know this, but I was a biblical studies major back in the day. It was back when I was in college, and it was something that I really liked. And one of the things that I miss most about being in a congregation is actually Bible study. It's one of those times when the pastor can sit down with his or her congregation, and they can begin to talk about the text. And one of the texts that is really important to me and to the life at the Council of Churches is the story of the Good Samaritan. The Good Samaritan finds its place in Luke 10, which is really a provocative chapter, and you could read the entire chapter and get a lot out of it. But where that chapter falls is at the end of Luke 9. There's a discussion between the disciples and Jesus about a Samaritan village. The Samaritan village rejects Jesus, and then the disciples want to rain down fire, and then Jesus ends up rebuking the disciples. Look it up, read it. And then after that, Jesus sends out the 70. Now the 70 are disciples or followers of Jesus who he sends into the villages, and they then come back with reports of casting out demons, of people being healed, all kinds of things that are very positive, and then there's a lot of rejoicing amongst the disciples as well as Jesus. And then right after all of that, there's this story of the Good Samaritan. Just then a lawyer stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he said, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" He said to him, "What is written in the law? What do you read there?" He answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And Jesus said to him, "You have given the right answer. Do this and you will live." But wanting to justify himself, the lawyer asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers, who stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, while traveling, came near him, and when he saw him, he was moved with pity. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, having poured oil and wine on them. Then he put on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he was out 2 denarii. He gave them to the innkeeper and said, 'Take care of him, and when I come back, I will repay you whatever you spend.' Which of these do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell in the hands of the robbers?" The lawyer said, "The one who showed him mercy." Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise." The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So today, to help me talk about this provocative passage, are 2 ministers from our area. Carolyn Stow, who is the pastor at both Boulevard United Methodist Church and Sarah Jane Johnson United Methodist Church.
Good morning.
Welcome to Encounter, Carolyn.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks.
Encounter.
It's good to be back here.
Yeah, it's good to have you back on. And Dawn Victoria Mitchell, she is also a pastor of 2 congregations, All Saints Episcopal Church in Johnson City, as well as St. Mark's Episcopal in Shenango Bridge. Welcome back to Encounter, Dawn.
Thank you. It's good to be back. It's been a spell.
It has been a spell. And I've been wondering, well, what's been going on in your congregations, if you would like to talk at all about it. But on top of that, like when did this come up in your lectionary? It was just a couple weeks ago?
Yeah, about 3 weeks ago, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's fairly recently.
We don't, I'm not a lectionary preacher per se.
Okay.
It didn't. We were actually in the middle of a series about means of grace, Wesley's means of grace, and reconnecting with God as the two churches are learning to worship together and things like that.
Oh, okay. Well, this is always interesting because not everybody follows the lectionary all the time, and I'm one that usually does, but then on occasions, I do veer off, so I know how that feels.
I do that in the summer more. Because sometimes it can get a little long. So to bring in a series here and there that might be relevant and important to the congregation.
All right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk a little bit about this text. And like one of the questions that automatically comes to mind, is this whole issue of the lawyer. And I know that before when we were talking about this whole thing, was the lawyer part of the 70? Was he not part of the 70? Was he part of the crowd? Did he come out? Was he a plant from the Pharisees? Right. Like, what's your take on that?
That's a really great question. That's not something I've really considered very much, but I do know that in the Gospels, generally, the religious leaders and the lawyers aren't painted in a very positive light. They always seem to have some tension with Jesus. They're always trying to get Jesus to say something or do something so that they can find charges against Jesus to arrest him, which ultimately does happen. So there's nothing any way in the scriptures, so it's unclear. It's possible.
Yeah, I mean, because there were other people that were, there were followers of Jesus, like you have Nicodemus, Joseph of Arimathea,
right?
Nicodemus. Mm-hmm. There are a number of people within the story that are all part of that group who. Yeah, Carolyn.
And you think about those folks, Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea, etc., and I think that these may be Pharisees or Pharisee followers, is how I'll say that, who are really trying to work out their own faith.
Right.
So here they have Jesus saying, are you really doing this right? Mm-hmm. Could you be hearing God wrong? Could you have heard God wrong all your life, and your father and your father's father, right? And Jesus doesn't say it as gently as that.
Right.
Right? He says, y'all got it wrong. You study the scriptures. Right. But I got a sense that attorney, I think it even said, he wanted to make sure he was understanding it right. I can't remember the exact language you read.
Well, the first thing it says he went to test Jesus.
Right, but
and then in the second he wanted to justify himself.
To justify himself.
Right.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Right. So in the first sense it was to test whether he was following the law, whether he was actually part of their tradition, and then they moved from being a part of that tradition to wanting to justify himself. And so then at that point you've started meddling. And
that's what he felt like.
Yeah, pastors are really good at meddling.
We're supposed to meddle. Sorry.
Right. We're supposed to meddle. And so as at some point, you have to kind of say, I'm poking the bear, right? Right. And so Jesus is obviously meddling, and then he wants to justify himself, and then he begins this story.
That's kind of why I think it's a self-exploration.
Right.
It's a crisis of faith.
Mm-hmm. But to some extent, that second question, who is my neighbor, he's almost kind of wanting to draw a line in the sand. Who do I have to be kind and compassionate and caring to?
Right.
Are there people I can legally discriminate against
Right.
and not do stuff for because the law says it's okay.
Right.
Which gets into the deeper motivation of wanting to justify himself, so he really isn't as good in his relationship with God as he thinks
Right.
he is. Because Jesus flips that question to, how can I be a neighbor to
Right.
those around me, regardless of whether they're a Samaritan, a woman, a tax collector, a Pharisee. Everyone is my neighbor, and ultimately, we're here to care for one another and to help one another.
I can almost hear the attorney going, oh yeah? Well, who is my neighbor, right? Tell me who I gotta help and who I don't have to,
Yeah.
right?
Well, and really, I mean, if you wanted to take this story down to its bare bones, Jesus could have said something like, well, just go find people out there in the world and do something good for them, and if you find a person who's been hurt by the side of the road, well, just go out and be nice to them. But that's not how he told the story. Instead he uses these loaded terms, right? So in Luke, there's the loaded term of the lawyer.
Right.
We've already discussed that a lot. And now there are other loaded terms within the scripture too, right? So where do we go with that?
Samaritan, the priest, the Levite, right? He was calling people out by name.
Right. And so for us, it would be like, he called up the senior pastor and the music minister. And, and they're the ones that walk down by the side of the road. And then, if you wanted to put it into context, you could do that. And for us, it's easy for us to say, all right, it was a priest and a Levite, because we don't really relate to those terms as well. But if we were to sit down and look at it through the lens of the first century audiences, they're kind of listening to this story.
Okay.
All of a sudden they're going, what? My pastor did that?
Okay.
Yeah.
So, what if it's rather, they don't hear it as that's the pastor, but that's themselves?
That's me, myself.
So remember, the exchange is with the attorney who I believe Jesus triggered a personal crisis of faith, right?
Right.
So the attorney thinks he's going to catch him. So tell me, right? How do I obey the law? And Jesus turns it back on him and says, well, you tell me, how do you obey the law? And he says, I do this and this.
Right.
Great, you got it down. Jesus thinks we're moving forward, supposedly, right? Jesus knows what's going on. And then the lawyer attacks him and says, hey, wait a second. Who is my neighbor? I got to make sure I'm living right here. And that's when Jesus says, let me explain this to you.
Yeah.
And notice who he makes the villain and who he makes the hero.
Right.
The innkeeper, a nobody, right? The Samaritan, who, like you pointed out, the disciples are ready to burn down their village, right? He doesn't make the folks the attorney is following the heroes who he thought they were.
Right.
Yeah.
Everybody's understanding of what our relationship with God is being shaken.
Right. And now it's a Samaritan. Now,
Yeah.
what does that term mean?
In my sermon a few weeks ago, I actually outlined briefly a little bit of the history. Ultimately, the Samaritans and the Jewish people were the same people.
Right.
The Jewish people were from the southern kingdom of Judea, that once upon a time was part of the united monarchy with the northern kingdom of Israel under King David. It was after King David's son Solomon that the two broke apart into Israel and Judah. Then Babylon came in and no, Assyria. sorry.
Assyria, yep, exactly.
And,
The Persians, or the...
right, the southern kingdom, yeah, came in, and some of the people in the northern kingdom assimilated. They adopted some of their cultural practices, they intermarried, and so the Jewish people began to look at their former countrymen as mixed race, as impure, because they weren't worshiping God faithfully according to them, like not going to the temple in Jerusalem. Said they brought in some of the customs from Assyria, and that's where the trouble begins, and why there's such a conflict between the Jewish people and the Samaritans traditionally. But they were the same people once upon a time. And I think that speaks something to us today in a time of deep division. You know, we're all the same people. We're God's people, God's beloved children.
Yeah, once Republicans and Democrats were the same people.
Exactly, yeah.
Oh my gosh, once conservatives and progressives were the same people, right?
Well, yeah, I mean...
Right?
Yeah.
Once Protestants and Catholics were the same people. Let's keep going, let's keep going, let's keep going, right?
Yeah, we could
Yeah.
keep going. Once we were all the same people, and now we are separate people.
Oh, that darn Tower of Babel, sorry.
Well, I know. I mean, this is kind of, it's always kind of interesting, you know, that the Samaritan, this vilified person, is the hero of the story. And then, you know, and the folks who were on the inside, the ones who are, you know, the one that the lawyer probably, well, we right now, we have this separate indication of who a lawyer is versus who the religious people are. Now, at the time of Jesus, there wouldn't have been this stark demarcation line between them. The law was actually somebody who, the lawyer was likely somebody who was just a Levite, or somebody who was well steeped in the law, who knew of the law and was there to interpret the law for the people.
These would be the laws of the temple, not the laws of government.
Right.
And that's where we get hung up, because these days we don't have attorneys enforcing church law.
Right.
Our lawyers are enforcing governmental law. So we have to remember that these were attorneys, mouthpieces for the Pharisees.
Right. So my guests today are Carolyn Stow, and she is the pastor at Sarah Jane Johnson and Boulevard United Methodist, and Dawn Victoria Mitchell. She is the pastor at St. Mark's Episcopal and All Saints Lutheran. So we're Episcopal. I'm so sorry. I always do that. And for all of you out there, just remember, you know, sometimes I have a slight thing that goes off in my head, and it's just there, you know. It's just the way things work.
I did that too with the Assyrians and the Babylonians.
There you go. We have these things, right?
Welcome to the human
Right.
race.
So as we're thinking about this text, and we want to make it good news, because really, ultimately, you know, the gospel is about good news for the world, and a good news for our people, and for the folks who are at home. How is this story good news?
For me, at least, I see the good news in that everyone is my neighbor, and we're called to stand with each other and be with one another. I know you can kind of make allegory of it and say, you know, Jesus was our good Samaritan who took us in and cared for us when we were kind of by the road, lost, broken in our relationship with God. And that also is good news.
Right.
That, you know, we have someone who sets us the model of caring and compassion, so that we can once again have that relationship with God.
Yeah, and that reading is really interesting to me at some points, because they've done studies. They actually did studies on pastors, and this is it's kind of a weird thing to think about, but Princeton Seminary, they conducted the pastoral counseling unit conducted a study on pastors, and they gave them this text, and they said, okay, go study this text, and then come at such and such a date and give a lecture on it. So they did that, and they were on their way back, on their way to the hall where they were supposed to give a lecture on this text, and they had a person planted to test them again, and this person was in need, and somebody was, and they just walked right by because they were so concentrating on getting to the lecture hall to give their take on the text that they forgot the meaning of the text itself. And so in a way, when I'm thinking about this story, I'm thinking about, who am I overlooking? Where are my blinders at play? And how do I get to a point where in my own personal life where I behave like Jesus would, which is to find the lost, the broken, the people by the side of the road, because my blinders are such that I'm concentrating on my resume, all the things that are necessary for me to be, the Reverend Dr. Joseph Sellepack, instead of it being about, a walk with God, walk with Jesus, and trying to find out who is Jesus calling me to serve.
And that sounds like my take on the attorney. Excuse me, the lawyer. That's where we get hung up, right? It's the lawyer, not the attorney. Right? I think that he may have been forced by Jesus to look at his own blinders.
Yeah.
And that's never a fun thing to have to do.
Right.
And as pastors / prophets, we are called in many ways to force that crisis of faith, to force people to see the blinders that they're wearing in their own relationship with God. And then we also have to be willing to look at our own. Right? Because we're just as human. Welcome to the human race. It's nice to have you with us, right?
Right.
As the folks who we are overseeing.
Right.
Right. So, for me, one of the new church, just getting to learn Boulevard, all of that, and one of my first sermons is usually, it's not about me, right? This is about your relationship with Jesus and how I can help make that stronger and better.
Right.
Sometimes that means removing your blinders.
Right.
Sometimes that means removing my blinders.
And sometimes it means poking the bear.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's always fun, isn't it? No,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, sarcasm is not healthy.
Yeah. And Jesus and the Hebrew prophets, they're great at doing that, holding up a mirror, so it's like, oh, that's me
Right.
they're talking about.
That's the blemish on my face. That's the log in my eye, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And so like for me, when I'm thinking about this text, and I have preached on it, and when I preached on it, I did, like when you were suggesting more of an allegorical kind of presentation, that's kind of where I went with this, but then I said, go and do likewise, which is the challenge to become more like Jesus. It's kind of like, when you want, for better or for worse, I know people wear the WWJD bracelets or whatever as a way of asking themselves their questions, but I really want to know what Jesus would do in this situation. It would be an important topic for the church to discuss. Like, are we really following the Jesus of the Good Samaritan, or are we following the law?
Right.
And how is it by what is influencing our mission programs? What is influencing our budget? Is it the Good Samaritan story, or are we redoing the law all the time, basically by keeping buildings up or by doing any number of other things instead of really healing people?
I think we also get hung up on focusing on the Levite and the folks who passed by.
Right.
Right. If we're going to really ask what would Jesus do, Jesus is suggesting we ask ourselves, what did that Samaritan do?
Right.
Right. And so when I preached on this the last couple of times, I actually took a look at who Jesus chose to make the hero and who Jesus chose not to. And it took that good news perspective of it's all inclusive. Now here's something that we forget. The Pharisee, the Levite, the attorney are also part of all.
Yeah.
Right? That attorney was wrestling with, oh my golly, have I gotten this wrong?
Yeah.
He started out trying to make Jesus look bad, and he went, holy, this is the mirror. And he didn't keep that up. I kind of think of him like, I can't remember the character that slunk away in the night. I didn't want to sell my property. I didn't want to give up all my property, right? This guy didn't say that. He went, Nicodemus, 3 times back, having that crisis of faith.
Yeah.
They're not bad things.
No. No, and really, I mean, some of the better folks are the ones like Nicodemus or like the lawyer who have had that crisis of faith, had something happen to them, and then they become different and better people. And I think that is the role of the gospel, right? To make us better people.
Yeah.
So
Sanctifying grace. Sorry, that's my next sermon series.
well, that's awesome. Excellent. This is very, very good. Hey, I want to thank both of you, Carolyn Stow and Dawn Victoria Mitchell, both colleagues, pastors in the area. I appreciate your ministries. I appreciate your churches. I pray for them, and I want you both to know that I'm grateful for you being on Encounter today, and for all of you who are here today and wondering, what do we do with this text? Well, read it. It's in Luke chapter 10. And ask yourself the question, can I show mercy? And can I be a better and a kinder and a gentler person? Because I know a story called the Good Samaritan. Have a great day. And now for 30 seconds, we have to